You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. Thank you guys always for listening to the show. This week's guest is certainly a very interesting one, and he holds the honor of having the most deployments of anybody we've had on the Hazard Ground Podcast, with a total of 15 of them, 5 of them to Iraq, 10 of them to Afghanistan, as a member of the 75th Ranger Regiment as the biggest part of his career. And he is Jesse Yandell, and he joins the program now. Jesse, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Thanks for allowing me to share my story with your tribe today.
Well, your story certainly is an interesting one. As I said, 15 deployments, that is just unreal. We always kick the podcast off asking how people got in the military, but I want to take this in a little bit different direction because I do want to find out how you got in. But when you do that many deployments over the course of your career, like when you look back and you think about what you've piled into a career and what you were up against, how do you view it now that it's all over?
Well, it's pretty simple. Like, one of my best mentors, guys will probably bust my chops for bringing his name up. But Rick Merritt, be hard, do the right thing, take care of the man you're left and right. Pretty simple rules to live by. And as the trip started coming up, you just can't let yourself not take care of the man you're left and right. And I think that's just really what kept me in the game so long. And, at the end of the day, this is what we train to do. And, we had quite a bit of business to take care of. And it's just really hard to walk away from that man you're left and right.
That's a sentiment that we've heard expressed a lot, especially by more of the, special operations community, because of the way you guys train and what you have to do, that you're such a tight-knit community. But did anybody ever kind of say to you, hey, Jesse, man, look, we got this. You've done enough. Like, we understand it. We get where you're coming from, but really, hey, sit this one out, bro. Give yourself a little breathing room.
Yeah, lucky for me, in 2008, I got nicked a little bit, and I was able to take a little bit of a breather. So that gave me, from my 10th deployment to my 11th deployment, 24 months off while I recovered from getting nicked up a little bit.
Oh, so we would have went to 16 instead of 15. That's interesting. There you go. Well, let's go backwards and start. How did this whole career start for you? How'd you get in the military?
Excellent. Great question. I think I was getting in the military from the first day I was of this world in May 14th, 1978. I was raised by a Marine father, who served during a kind of a different time than we're serving now. A little bit different public perspective of what they think of their troops. But at the end of the day, my dad raised me under the same discipline that he learned in the Marine Corps. He kind of went a different path after he transitioned. He went into 1% motorcycle clubs and served in that style of organization, thinking that was the right thing for him to do for quite a while. In 1989, he took a different step, and he transitioned out of that lifestyle, and he went back to the standard American that was paying taxes and working hard and going to church and doing the right thing in his community. And that really, it was something that he did to kind of set the example for me, which I'm very appreciative of, because I didn't spend the rest of my life in the penitentiary. But right about the time I was getting into high school, things were coming very, the military is the way, whether it was, being in a young Marine style training outfit that kind of got people in that Marine lifestyle, or it was joining the local ROTC at my high school, that really just wherever I was going to be, there was going to be a military approach to it. And then after the day I turned 17, my father convinced me that it'd be a great idea to join the Florida Army National Guard, which I did as well. And 2 weeks later, after my junior year of high school was over, I went to the Fort Benning School for underprivileged boys and spent about 9 weeks of my life there doing basic training. Came back for my senior year of high school, knocked that out, had a great time, kind of not being at basic training anymore. and then knocked out the infantry course after I graduated high school. Once I came back from that, it was, all right, hey, you've kind of laid the groundwork. You have all this college money available to you that we've paid for prior to going to the National Guard. You have everything the National Guard has available for you. So what are you going to do? And my answer was, well, I'm going to take off the next 6 months because I just lost that in Fort Benning, Georgia. And I just kind of want to chill out a little bit. That wasn't really the plan that my father laid out for me. So he asked me to make a decision whether to, start school tomorrow and live at the house, or get a job and move out, or join the military active duty. And he wanted an answer by Saturday.
Wow.
And that Thursday, I gave him an answer and said I was going to Fort Lewis, Washington. I just signed a 4-year active duty contract. And the only reason I picked Fort Lewis, well, there's two. It was the farthest one away from my hometown, growing up in Central Florida, and it was probably the quickest way I could get into the Rangers, combined, which was serving 18 months on active duty and then having the ability to apply for the Ranger Indoctrination Program. After being up in, the real Army for a hot minute, I got levied to Hawaii after 6 months of being in Fort Lewis. My first question at the levy brief was, hey, I only have to serve another year here to go to RIP. Can I decline this appointment to go to Hawaii? And they're like, absolutely, except you'll be barred to re-enlist. So I didn't really want to cut out my military career at that point in time. So aloha is the best word that I could come up with at that point.
Now, what year is this all happened? This is all prior to 9/11, correct?
Yeah, this is 1996.
All right, okay.
And I showed up to Hawaii January of 1998, and just couldn't swing a dead cat without running into somebody from the 75th Ranger Regiment as either my team leader, my squad leader, my platoon sergeant, my first sergeant, which, as a matter of fact, was the first rifle company that I walked into in Hawaii. I had that style of leadership. After cutting my teeth for about 4 months with them, there used to be these things called long-range surveillance detachments. And it was all about sending your best people to go succeed in these days, in the mid-90s. People that could, walk a little bit farther, carry a little bit heavier ruck, and wanted a little bit more about, out of their contract. So I got asked to go to the long-range surveillance detachment selection. And same thing when I got there. I mean, you couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting 5 guys that served in the regiment. These were different days where the Abrams Charter was very much intact, and a lot of guys were, taking a break from the regiment to go serve, in different places, because the Army provided, great locations back then that you could go to for 4 to 5 years and 3 to 4 years, and show your family a different lifestyle, i.e. Germany, Alaska, Italy, Hawaii, which has obviously changed quite a bit because the outcomes of those organizations are pretty high these days. And, every position I was in, I was just, it's like I couldn't get away from guys who were like, you need to go farther. You need to go farther. This is not where you belong. So next thing I know, I've graduated LURSLIC, which became RSLIC, which I have no idea what it's called now. Airborne School, Air Assault School, Tracker School. I got my pre-ranger, now got my ranger tab. And it's like, all right, what's next? And it's like, all right, let's go to the regiment. And I had a leader who was like, all right, stop. You need to go down the line for a hot minute and be a fire team leader in an infantry squad, because you got it way too good here. Your shit don't stink. And, you need to get some reality. And that was the greatest thing that could have ever happened to me, because I went down there. I got a platoon sergeant that was a Panama vet from 275. I got to join a platoon that didn't have a lot of Ranger qualified guys, period, much less a Spec 4. And then I got to go to the board and kind of present that, here's a specialist going to the board with the Ranger tab. And, Steve Greer was my sergeant major at the time, very popular guy in my opinion. And he just kind of asked me, he's like, what are you doing after this board? And the only answer I could come up with is I'm PCS in the 1st Ranger Battalion. He's like, you think so? And I was like, Roger that, Sergeant Major. So, it's still this time. The Ranger Regiment was so heavy on tab specialists that you couldn't, no matter who you knew or who your dad was, you couldn't get a contract to go to RIP. So you had to go get promoted and apply after you got promoted to sergeant. So went to PLDC, got some awards, sent my awards and my promotion orders because you got promoted at graduation to the Ranger LNO down there at the time would have been Alexandria, and got a reply back within 2 hours that said, you got a class date in 2 weeks, if you can get there, and I'm probably the only guy to leave Hawaii with 2 years time in service, and in less than 2 weeks, lately, and that was pretty unheard of back then.
Yeah,
and,
different world before 9/11, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just, I was able to rock into the right people's offices and just be like, this is what I'm going to do with my life, and I want your support, and I won't let you down.
Hey, back up for a second real quick. During that board, when that Sergeant Major asked you what you were doing, you said I'm PCS into the Ranger Regiment. What was his response?
Recite the Ranger Creed.
Okay, so he just kept pushing you. But like, what was the look? Did you see the look in his eyes or anything else? Was he befuddled, disbelief? What was it?
I think he was more happy to hear somebody say the Ranger Creed than anything. And once I kind of knocked that out in front of him, it was pretty much a done deal at that point. I knew I had his vote of approval.
So you finally get to Ranger School, right? After all this?
I'd already had my tab when I was in the conventional Army, and showed up to what's called the Ranger Orientation Program back then.
Okay.
Which is now RAS 2. And it's a 3-week program. They kind of put you through to obviously assess your critical events, which in the Ranger Regiment are PT test, 5-mile run, 12-mile road march, some other various physical activities, some airborne activities, and, obviously leadership potential, because that's what they're hiring you for. And at the end of that 3-week program, I was successful and kind of sat in the board, and they were like, if you're right now, you're what we call a TDY en route to 1st Ranger Battalion. If you weren't selected today, like, what's your plan? And I'm like, well, there isn't one. I came here planning to go to 175. I had orders direct, and it all kind of worked out from there.
All right, so when you finally get to 175, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, for those not familiar, what are you doing? What year is it? What month is it? And kind of give me all the background.
Yeah, so it was perfect. They just went on a hard training and deployment to a couple various places. And, I kind of show up, new guy sitting in the CP, and as a sergeant, by the way, which, the regiment is all about, different things. And it's about earning your place at the table. I won't use some of the words that some people have, but there's a right to be there, and just passing selection is not necessarily the entire right to be there. Like, you still prove yourself every day as selection in the Ranger Regiment. So, it was a little rough in the beginning. There's a certain few words that you're issued, that people reply to you as, and quite frankly, you just got to perform every day. From the time I met my sergeant major to him informing me that I was going to be, going to Charlie Company, 1st Ranger Battalion, to the time I met my first sergeant, and backing up a little bit, Doug Greenway, probably one of the most famous Rangers in my opinion. There's, when your nickname's Combat, that means you're probably a good fucking dude. And, Rick Merritt, who's just a fucking Ranger legend, part of my language. But, I owe everything in my life to those guys because they put me in positions to be successful. And then I went to 2nd Platoon Charlie Company, 1st Ranger Battalion, which is, quite frankly, one of the, the farm teams of leadership. A lot of guys that have served in the Ranger Regiment in high successful leadership positions over the last 2 decades have walked through the doors of that hallway. And I had the honor to serve with those men as well. When you walk up the hallway from first platoon to second platoon, there was a mural that said "Pray for War, Kill for Peace," and obviously, in 2001, September 11th, that's definitely what became a reality.
Where were you on that day? What were you doing?
We were not in the U.S. We were training, doing some other things, and it was kind of interesting because we were in an exercise, and one of our exercise controllers kind of informed us from something that had happened, and quite frankly, you couldn't sit there and defer between reality and exercise. We actually really didn't know. So it was kind of a really strange feeling for a couple minutes until, he kind of came out with it. It was like, the exercise is over at this time. And obviously we went back to a safer place after that, and then rotated back to the U.S. But it was very interesting moment when that happened. I mean, it was something I think about all the time. I never, it's even strange to think about. I can actually remember the feelings of coming off the airplane back to the U.S. after we've been invaded, so to speak.
And what were they?
I felt like we weren't in the right spot. I felt like, we had all the tools, the right people, the capabilities to stay forward and be there, for wherever our country needed. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, there's people that make better decisions than me. And, they took the guys that were home, they could get all their administrative and stuff, squared away, knock out a couple of rehearsals, and then go, lead that entry into that next place where we need to be at, which obviously was 3rd Ranger Battalion.
All right, so 9/11 happens. How quickly do you get to your first of 15 deployments?
So right about August 2002.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So in 1st Battalion, as a lot of people know, they scaled down the footprint quite a bit after 3rd Battalion invaded. And I would have never guessed in 1,000 years that we'd invaded a country and only one Ranger company would have went forward after that. Obviously, that was Alpha Company, 1st Ranger Battalion, and the story goes on with them, with what happened on Takagar and the missions that they were successful on, and represented their men and their organization very well. And we just kind of went through the progress. We just went through the process. Trust the process, because nobody really knew what was going to happen next. And we continued to train hard and get ready for the next trip. I mean, it wasn't like guys were jumping ship. Guys were just waiting for their number to be called. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of an organization that everybody kind of stuck together and waited for that number. And that came up there in 2002 and it kept going from there.
All right, I want to take a little bit of a different approach because, with a lot of our guests, we end up focusing on one, seminal event or something that happened on a given deployment. But because you've had so many, I kind of feel like I have to ask it from what stands out to you from your first couple of deployments? Like, was there anything in particular that you remember that is an overriding feeling, thought, event than any other one?
I mean, there's a couple out there. I mean, in 2003, obviously we did the invasion of Iraq, and there's a lot of guys that just thought that was going to be a lot more sportier than it was. But quite frankly, every mission we were asked to do, we completely knocked it out of the park. And sometimes the enemy doesn't present itself. And I had a platoon sergeant tell me once, who was a Desert Storm vet, during our first deployment, he was, here's the guy who went to Desert Storm as a private. And he just looked at us and said, "Men, beware what you wish for." Everybody's looking for this great thing or this big gunfight, but one thing that Frank told us that I'll never forget is just beware what you wish for. So instead of doing that, I think it kind of put everybody in the mind of just be ready for what's going to happen next, because you don't know what that is. And it's a lot easier to kind of live through those deployments, just being ready for what's going to happen next, instead of just wishing for the great big thing to happen. And And that kind of leads into, an operation we did, after the invasion back in Afghanistan, where, quite frankly, we did a 65-day patrol.
Wow.
Up in living out of a pack in a Toyota Hilux, with 40 of your closest friends. And I will tell you, there's guys that'll tell you that, that deployment sucked, nothing happened, da 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 da. And I'll tell you, the friendships I'll have for the rest of my life were made during those 65 days. And all those guys that were a part of that know that. And some that aren't with us anymore, knew that as well. And, it was just one of those things, like, you can't bond any harder than putting 10 guys in a 6x6 room, with no furnace, and negative 14-degree weather.
Yeah. And let me put this in perspective for some people who may not know this. I mean, obviously, patrols where you're out just, pounding pavement and maybe searching houses and searching neighborhoods and things of that nature, typically in Iraq and Afghanistan, those may have lasted a couple of hours to a day, 2, maybe 3 days. I mean, some might have even extended up to a week, but 65 days, folks, that's over 2 months of never putting your head on like a pillow. You're just basically sleeping on whatever bag you have, whatever shirt you have, whatever it is that you're carrying around with you. Obviously you guys train differently, so your mindset is different. But at any point in time, did you ever kind of question why you're still out there for 65 plus days? Is it day 30, day 40, day 50? I mean, at what point do you just go, hey, what the hell's going on here?
Once again, it kind of goes back to that initial embrace that I got in 1st Ranger Battalion for my first sergeant. It was just like, man, you're here to be hard, do the right thing, and take care of the man you're left and right. And those are pretty easy rules to live by.
Sure.
There's a lot of things in our charter and the Ranger Creed, that they're expanded a little bit, but if all you're thinking about is like just doing the right thing because this is what I'm here to do, spending less time bitching about the process and more time, figuring out how you can assist in the outcome, things are going to work out a lot better for you. And I kind of lived my whole career like that. Like, I just really didn't have a lot of time to complain because I was just always kind of worried about, what can I do to make the team better?
You go through 15 deployments. Obviously, you didn't come out of all 15 unscathed. Not you personally, I just mean the guys from your unit. Do you remember that first one of your brothers who was taken from you? And was it any different on a different deployment when you lost another one? Is the feeling the same? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, great question because it's going to sound kind of awkward. So when March 4 happened, I was actually training for the Best Ranger competition because I had the opportunity to do that, and the battalion was going to send so many guys to do that because we didn't go on that deployment with Alpha Company when they went through the Takagar mission. And I knew Mark Anderson like very well. I mean, and the reason I knew him well is because he was an Alpha Company and they had all the heavy machine guns, and I was a Charlie Company guy and we had 0 heavy machine guns and Mark 19s. And just watching him train every one of my Rangers in my squad to get a go on the event made him feel so good. And it's something like he would not let one of your Rangers leave his station until he absolutely felt like that guy was going to get a go when he came through for testing. And that meant a lot to me. So, seeing Mark pass was definitely, it hit me hard. Now, that was in, March 3rd, 2002. Fast forward quite a bit farther. I got shot October 28, 2008, and was home on recovery from that deployment. And one of my Rangers, Anthony Davis, who was one of my gunners when I was in weapons squad, got killed on a deployment. And that was on June 6, 2009. And because I was home and the battalion was forward and I was the closest guy to him while he was a Ranger, I was asked to be the liaison to his family.
Oh, wow.
So if you can think of kind of like a CQB scenario, the Army's CAO CNO team is kind of the 1 and 2 man going into the family's house. You wait for them to exfil, and then you're the next guy that walks in.
All right, let me break down what you said a little bit for those who are non-military. So when he says CQB, it's close quarters combat, or close quarters, contact with the enemy, and the one guy goes through the door and the two guy goes through the door in that order. When you say CAO is casualties assistance officers, those are the people who go out and notify the families that their loved ones are no longer with us. Go back to when they asked you to do that job. I mean, that's got to, because some of the casualty assistance officers actually get training on what to do and what to say and how to react and so on and so forth. But in your case, that's not something that was, part of your Ranger training or Ranger indoctrination. So when they ask you to do that, is that a tough task to do? Or is it something like you said, hey, I'd absolutely do it because this is my guy?
Yeah, I mean, it was about, 11:30 at night when I got the phone call. If you can think about the time differences. And, your answer obviously is yes, I'll be there. And, you're jumping in a car, 4 hours later to head up there. And as that team that the Army sends up is walking out of the house, you're the first guy to walk in and kind of be like, the unit's here to support you. We're going to be with you side by side through this entire event to, honor your son and assist your family through this traumatic event. And it was quite the honor that I had to be able to do that. And, one of my mentors, Doug Pallister, who was our regimental sergeant major, he told me during that event, he's like, you will be connected to this family for the rest of your life. And I will tell you that, to this day, he was completely right about that.
Is that a tougher job than combat in certain cases?
So I've heard it said quite a few times that, your rear detachment deployment will be the hardest deployment you never went on. Unfortunately, that came true for me the next trip because I was asked to be, I was pretty senior. I was a master sergeant, and they asked me I was a sergeant first class promotable, but they asked me to be the rear detachment first sergeant for the battalion the next trip. And during that trip, because I was still going through recovery, I mean, we still had, we had 3 Rangers killed in action and 26 that were very seriously wounded or very seriously injured in 2009. And you basically just ping pong yourself between, whether it's Walter Reed or BAMC. And unfortunately, the family events that are going on as well, making sure those families are taken care of to the utmost importance, and no matter what it takes to soothe their needs or soothe their, their wants or desires at that time to make that process work out. Because unfortunately, sometimes there just isn't enough Army systems to make things work. And we're kind of there with some of our, unit supporters to help them through that. And, quite frankly, it was some of the hardest work I ever had to do, but it's some of the most privileged work I've had to do because at least I got to be a part of, them making it through it. And there's, and those families are still into the recovery process today and will be for quite some time. And, you just got to make sure that, no matter whatever you guys need, I'm still here for you, even 10 years later.
Yeah. I mean, what is the connection with those families like? So and you had your mentor tell you you were going to be connected to them for life. I mean, I'm sure you believed them, but what is that relationship like after all these years have passed?
It's good. I mean, Anthony Davis, his family, I'm still able to be connected to his sister today. She's stationed out in Hawaii as a sergeant first class on one of the I forget what they call it, but it's essentially the people that go back into South Vietnam and assist with some of the mortuary affairs aspects of identifying remains. Her brother, Paris Davis, actually works at the post where I retired next to. So we're able to see each other, every other week or so. And, potentially get out for fishing or have kids over to my place or his place, is always in conversation. I happen to be married to a sister of one of the Rangers, the families that I assisted. We connected about 2 years later, after Jason was taken. And, today we have, well, as of next week, we have 4-year-old twins together.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. I'm a father of twins myself. So great men produce twins. That's what I always say. Let me ask you about your individual, situation, because you mentioned that you had got shot, but I did read that, the Army wanted to send you home and put you out and said, hey, you're no longer fit for duty and all that, but you managed to overcome all that. What was that when you got shot that they were thinking of doing that?
Yeah. So, I had a pretty interesting injury. I got shot in the chest, and luckily the round went off my rib and basically splattered into my chest cavity. So even though I have one entry, I had 7 canals of injury. God. And through 6 pulmonary embolisms, one of the pieces of the shrapnel went into what's called my pericardium, which is the best way to break that down for your guests is if your heart was an M&M, your pericardium would be the soft candy shell around the peanut M&M. And so I had a 2.8 centimeter piece of shrapnel, approximately 1.3 centimeters from my heart.
Jesus.
And I was kind of told, if you never jump off the back of your truck or, fall down really hard in the backyard, that, you would be able to succeed and live a healthy life without ever having to go through this painful, excruciating exploratory surgery. And my reply to my surgeon at the time, Jeremy London, there in Savannah, Georgia, was, Jeremy, if that's the case, I'm never ever going to be able to be a ranger or potentially be an operator again in my life. His immediate reply back was, this was a Thursday. He's like, hey, Jess, I got an opening on Tuesday. You want to knock it out this week? And I was like, yes, sir, let's do this. And knocked it out on March 2nd.
Hold on. You got to slow down because you're going to speed through this. I got to ask you something. So basically he's going to do open heart surgery on you and try to find a piece of shrapnel in your heart.
Yeah. And I can explain this a little bit better. So I had an operation called a lateral thoracotomy. So the initial version of a lateral thoracotomy is we're going to go in on 2 different sides. One's going to be a tool. The other one's going to be a camera. And we'll be under x-ray, and we're going to try to pull it out with robotic tools. And if they don't make it, they switch the tools, and they try to do it the other way. And they weren't able to do that as well. He said the other thing is you're probably going to wake up with an 11-inch scar on the side of your chest if those 2 1-inch scars don't work. But don't worry, we're going to connect the 2 of them. And they basically pop you open like a Thanksgiving turkey, and they go with forceps under x-ray and pull the shrapnel out, and they drop it in a container. And I got the latter part of that.
So, okay, they got the shrapnel out. Did you see it? Did they save it for you?
Yeah, I got it in my trophy case.
Oh, you're lying. Really? You kept it?
A good friend of mine who bust my chops later, Mark Whitten, who was my chaplain throughout all this and through many of my deployments in the regiment, was the first guy I saw when I woke up in surgery, and he showed it to me right there in a small container. And obviously I was able to leave the hospital. That's the only thing I have from all 15 deployments I brought home with me.
Wow, what a memento. I mean, I would look at that thing and be like, another millimeter this way, another millimeter that way, this little piece could have ended my life.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what they tell you when you're in Bagram in the cache is hey, you're the luckiest man in Afghanistan tonight. And, I just kind of took it, word for word and said, okay, and, when can I get back to my mates? And that's not the case. You're going home tonight. So I went through Germany and, Andrews Air Force Base, and then got home. And I mean, all I was ever trying to do after that was just, get back to a platoon, get back to line.
What was the rehab and the recovery like then?
The unfortunate part for me is I didn't do a very good job of that. And that's what I'll tell a lot of guys that got injured. Like, your number one goal after getting hurt needs to be recovery. My number one goal after getting hurt was, how do I get back to work? And I was offered a position to be the battalion operations sergeant major, and I took it, just because I just said, the only word I really knew very well in the unit was yes. And I just, 30 days from heart surgery, I actually went back to work on the 10th of April. And, was still on some pretty heavy painkillers, but I could operate pretty well. And I was able to kind of learn my new job and tear off of those painkillers because I didn't really want to take them anymore anyway. And I was able to operate pretty well. But I say that the biggest thing that I did wrong was, work was my focus. It never became recovery. It was like the last thing I was thinking of. It was just like, how can I work more? And actually, work is easier than recovery. And that was a huge mistake that I made. Fortunately, after about 4 months of work, I got offered to climb Mount Rainier before I had surgery. And I got a call from a guy named Ryan Job, who was a SEAL that got shot through both of his eyes and was blind. And he had done this summit of Mount Rainier the year prior to calling me. He's like, "Hey, Jess, we've selected you to be on our summit team this year, and I'm going to be right there with you every step of the way to base camp. And then you guys are going to go off and do the summit. You'll be fine. I did it last year. I'm blind in both eyes. Just trust your team, and they'll get you to the summit." And I was like, "Fucking, I'm in." How do I get to be a part of that? And 120 days from that lateral thoracotomy, I summited Mount Rainier.
Okay. Again, let me just put this in perspective for people who think you're nuts. Okay, so you basically had open heart surgery, and this is the thing that pumps blood to all of the rest of your body. You're about to climb one of the highest mountains in North America, Mount Rainier in Washington State, at a high altitude with a heart that isn't exactly 100% recovered yet. Are you nuts?
Yeah, I really didn't have like a proof of concept at the time. I really all I did in the meantime was like go to yoga classes, and because that's about all I could really do.
I was going to say, you couldn't run or anything, right?
No, but I got to spend about 24 days at Fort Irwin in California, in NTC. So I was I felt like I was at altitude every day, but I really wasn't doing what the guys were doing. I mean, I was on the target with the guys, maybe doing evaluations. I was definitely up, quite a bit throughout the day, working, pretty long days, but I wasn't doing what Ranger was doing. I wasn't wearing body armor yet. It really still, like, my scar tissue still hurt. I mean, it hurt on the mountain, but I wasn't on any pain meds. I mean, it went really back to that first leader that was just like, be hard and do the right thing and take care of the man in the left and right, and like, you'll be okay. And I just kind of went with it. What's the worst possible outcome?
Oh, death. Well, that would be the worst possible outcome.
This organization, Camp Patriot, surrounds you with very, very solid mentors. I mean, they're giving you a SEAL who, was shot through both eyes, who was successful. The year before, they had taken a single below-the-knee amputee. They give you, mentors like, Bob Vera, who's just, even to this day, one of my most, closest spiritual mentors. Just guys that just give you amazing amounts of encouragement for you to get back on top of the mountain. And you're doing it with some other special operator teammates, and you're just not going to let each other down. I even had Kenny Thomas was on my climb team.
Oh, wow.
And just like, having his encouragement, and just like getting to connect with him and what, him and some of his mates have been through. I mean, you're going to make it happen.
And Kenny Thomas from Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down, correct? That
Yes.
Kenny Thomas? Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he's obviously been through a lot as well. Let me ask you, the relationship and the bond that you have with all these guys and everything, If the nature of the work wasn't what it was, would the bond be as strong?
Great question. I don't really know. So my goal was just to get back to a Ranger strike force. How do I get back to a Ranger company? And I left as a senior sergeant first class. My only goal was to be a Ranger first sergeant. And after I was successful on the mountain, and after I was able to assess for what we call in the regiment the critical events, which going back to like my first day at selection for the regiment was PT test, 5-mile run, 12-mile road march. It's once I was able to get back to that state again and prove that I was back on top of the mountain, the next thing I knew, I was going to 2nd Ranger Battalion out of Fort Lewis, Washington to be on staff, but in order to be assessed to be a company first sergeant. And that's why I knew like I was back, like I'm going to reach that goal.
I wonder, just because, there are people I've deployed with who I haven't seen since deployment. I've barely spoken to them, maybe a handful of times here and there. I bumped into him in a room. I guarantee we'd fall back into the old routine, like we're best friends and we talk every single day. That's just kind of the connection that we have. And we didn't do the level of work that you guys did. And I say that just to illuminate the concept that, the bonds are so strong, but I can only believe that because you've had the job that you've had, the idea and the ideals that you hold to and the kind of mantra that you live by never leaves you guys either.
No, absolutely not. I mean, what was the furthest thing from me, which I wanted the most, was I wanted my Rangers back. Like I wanted to be able to influence, lead, and develop the next future of the Ranger Regiment. And, after a year or so in 2nd Ranger Battalion, I got that opportunity again to be a company first sergeant in a Charlie Company 2nd Ranger Battalion and deploy 5 more times with 2nd Ranger Battalion after I just did 10 with 1st Ranger Battalion. And it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me because I had no reputation. Nobody gives a damn if you got shot in your last unit. Like nobody cares in the regiment. It's really not that big a deal. Like we have guys that are hurt that come back to work every trip. Some guys miss a trip, some guys miss 2 trips. But at the end of the day, a guy that got hurt a couple trips ago, the first question he's got when he's sitting in his room with his doctors is, how do I get back to the platoon? How do I get back to my squad? My squad needs me, my company needs me, my regiment needs me. And that's just the mindset. And that's been said, to a man. I can guarantee this by every Ranger that's been hurt or nicked up on a trip. And, also pretty much every special operator, every service member. It's just like, how do I get back to my mates? What do I got to do? Does everybody like succeed in that? No, because there's some things that get in the way. Like sometimes you just can't pull it off.
Right.
Like it's and that's no fault of your own. I mean, we're in a fucking contact sport. And, there's just some guys that can't pull it off. But, my whole goal was, I think I can do this. And if I can do this, maybe that'll inspire one more other guy to get back on the field if he can recover from what happened to him as well.
Jesse, you spent so much time in your career just trying to get to a certain point to be a Ranger Company first sergeant and, just be with your mates. How did you know when you were done?
Well, it was pretty easy for me. I was on my 14th trip. My wife was 6 months pregnant with her twins, and I was the first sergeant deployed, and I didn't make the list that came out for Sergeant Major. And I had just an amazing command team in charge at 2nd Ranger Battalion. And, my boss just looked at me. He goes, "What's your 5-year plan?" And I told it to him in direct order. I was like, "Here's my plan. I'm going to deploy next trip. I'm fulfill my commitment as a company first sergeant. I'm going to deploy to a station that's not going to provide, not going to require me to deploy. I'm going to move somewhere local where I can plant my flag in the ground. I can focus on transitioning out of the military, and hopefully I can set up a job where I'm going to retire on a Friday and go to work on a Monday. He goes, that's the plan you need to do.
Wow.
And they were 100% right. Like, if I had all the people like talk me out of what my plan was. I had just as many people try to talk me out of it as I had people that told me they were jealous of my plan. They wish they had done that as well. And the more and more senior people who were like, you're making the right decision. Like, you have served long enough. Like, just go forth and do good things for the world. That was the continuous comment. I think if it had been 50-50, like, no, we really need you to stay in, or like, let's think about this from an adult perspective, it would have changed my mind. Like, they would have got me. But because I had that boss who was like, you always got to have a 5-year plan ready to go. And the day that list came out and I wasn't on it, I developed a 5-year plan pretty quick, and he supported me. And, to this day, that's one of my greatest mentors, and the bosses I had after that who continued to support my plan instead of trying to pull me back and dial me back, into, staying in the military and continuing the next phase.
Well, but the thing is, Jesse, the old saying, tiger doesn't change his stripes. Nothing that you'll do in the civilian world compares to what you've done in the Ranger Regiment. So how do you adjust to a life that doesn't have that?
So, to me, it's all about putting yourself in a position to help people grow exponentially. So I left the military thinking that I was going to go into the commercial construction field. And I basically got forced into a mentorship program with a guy named Phil Randazzo, who runs a nonprofit called AmericanDreamU.org. And he read my bio. He got some information about me from, a kid that I coached, who's one of my best friends today, who became my first business partner. And, Phil just said to me, he's like, look, I just think you got more to offer the world than sitting on a commercial construction site from 05 in the morning, leaving your house at 05 in the morning, getting home at 7 at night. You already know what that feels like. What if I was able to pull back the curtain a little bit and show you a different world of what you could succeed at in this other sector? And by doing that, I was able to go to multiple self-development conferences, develop a network of just robust, amazing relationships, amazing entrepreneurs, amazing business owners and speakers, and then be able to sit in a position to go, well, now I can leverage this. And, did management consulting for a year, started a marketing company that's doing very well today that I'm no longer a part of, and then pivoted to where I'm at right now, which is essentially my dream job. I mean, think about my career. My job title today is Leadership and Team Building Operations Manager.
Yeah.
At a small startup company that's inside of a larger holding of 200 companies, and we only work internal to that company. And we are the voice of innovation, strategy, leadership, and team building inside of this holding company. And that's the company I'm at today, called LDR, or LDRinvest.com. And it's just an amazing position to be in. I mean, I build facilitation courses for people to work out their strategy over the next 2 to 5 years, to building team building events that allow people to have a shared experience that are similar to what we have felt inside of this community, and allow them to grow and really get to know what their strengths and weaknesses are, and who they really are as a leader. Because at the end of the day, what these companies forget the most of is it's people above everything else. To quote a good friend of mine's book, it's people above everything else. And they forget about their people and worry about everything else. And every step of the way that I was in the Ranger Regiment, where I was the most successful and the leaders that I absolutely adore the most, it's when all they cared about was the men. If I just take care of the men, we're going to be okay. And that's just what I'm doing today.
Is there a emptiness in your civilian life that your military life gave you? If that question makes any sense.
I mean, not really. At the end of the day, you can only commandos for so long. Some of my mates have found ways to stretch it out a little bit, but trust me, there's only so many of those jobs available. I have enjoyed doing some independent contractor work where I get to kind of go out to some of the units and share some of my lessons learned and maybe be an enhancer for their training while I'm on target, helping out with, maybe the script or the roles that some other people are playing, or for example, some of the special effects that we could provide. I mean, it feels great because you're doing a service for the guys that are going to go forward and do this work that you were doing in your past. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's only so much say you got. I mean, and as far as the emptiness goes, I'm really, when I work with my clients, I'm only working towards a breakthrough. So as the same mission accomplishment I had, whether it was on target or leading and developing a younger Ranger, at the end of the day, you're just working towards a breakthrough. And I've found ways to have those breakthroughs in my private sector life.
What's the toughest part about transition, and what would you do differently?
You just don't have your mates next to you anymore. I mean, that's the bottom line. You become, you're the top dog in a 160-man company one day. You transition to another post where maybe you're just doing a job and, you're just a guy doing a job that used to be a different guy. And then once you transition, unfortunately, all your mates disappear at the same time. Not like they're doing it on purpose, but they are moving forward on the mission that they are expected to do on a daily basis. You are moving forward on a different vertical, light years away from where they're at, trying to accomplish your job. So there is an isolation perspective that it's very, very difficult to prepare for. One of the ways that I've gotten through that is there's some coaching that I got where you need to develop, who your top 20 people are that you need to contact every month and who your top 50 are that you need to contact every quarter. And that is something that's helped me through the process, where, some guys are just getting a phone call and they can't understand why I'm calling them every quarter. And it's just the fact that I want to stay connected to you. I want to find out what's going on in your life. And at the end of the day, I just want you to know that I love you. And, that I still think you're important. And I think some of those guys that get those phone calls from people, are very appreciative of it. And some of them kind of need it as well because they might be in the same spot. And my top 20 and my top 50 are not necessarily guys that are active duty. These are mates that I might have served with, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago that are out doing other things. But you need to not worry about networking so much because that's what everybody says the key to transition is. And I'm going to tell you, they're all full of shit. It's relationship working, relationship building, building those strong, lasting relationships, and continuing to stay kind of relevant. You just can't drop off the earth for 2 to 3 years and expect somebody to take a chance on you. Luckily, I was able to link up with some mates that, had served in the same organizations I had, and they knew what I was capable of. So when I contacted them and said, hey, I don't know what you're doing. I just want to be a part of it. Can you fill me in? They were already looking to fill the need. They just didn't know who it was yet. And because you stay relevant and you stay connected, you're just going to land on that person that has that need that you're looking for, looking to field, and they'll build the job position around you. And I was able to fall into something like that.
That's just amazing advice. I've never heard that before. The top 20 and the top 50. I've never heard it. And I think that it is a fantastic piece of advice for former military, for anybody who's a civilian. I mean, people coming out of college. So, I mean, that's tangible stuff that you can really sink your teeth into that really can have a positive effect on a lot of different things. In summation, when you look back on your career, what do you leave with?
Well, I leave with this. First of all, you got to be able to tell your story. When I first left the Army, I actually went to a 30-day intensive out in Silicon Valley. And they're like, okay, hey, we're gonna teach you how to tell your 30-second, 2-minute story. And my initial run was like, hey, I'm Jesse Yandell. I was in the Army for 20 years. And they're just like, stop. You've got to have a way to make yourself memorable, and you've got to have a way to make somebody want to continue the conversation with you. So you need to be able to talk about, kind of what you're capable of, what your jam is, what really you enjoy doing for organizations and what you kind of want to get back to as well. And so many guys kind of just, they forget, like, I had a leader that, I'll just never forget this guy, Bernie Felino. Do the routine things routinely. And I use this in my talk when I talk to executives, sports teams, coaches, students, whatever. But do the routine things routinely. That's what great organizations do. Okay. They don't just wake up one day, as Pete Rose says, I'm just like everybody else, except I got 5,280 hits. Like good organizations are just like everybody else. It's just they just do the basics amazing. They don't do like practice makes perfect. They do perfect practice makes permanent. And that's what I try to lead with as well, is just being able to help people get into that mindset to where, like, no matter what, we're here to win, and that's the end state. No questions asked. Get on board. I'm taking you to the end state. Let's go.
It's amazing. I mean, listen, your leadership is inspiring. Certainly, you have served your country in better ways than most have, given the 15 deployments and everything that you've, offered up as far as sacrifice of your body and your time and all that. And what you're doing now is incredibly important work, and obviously representing veterans in a positive light as well. But we can't thank you enough for being part of the podcast. And honestly, I mean, just all great things as you continue to kind of shape society in a different way through what you're doing now. And we certainly appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And to all your guests out there and all your fans, I'm sure you'll have my contact information in the show notes. And for anybody who wants to reach out and have a chat or connect at a larger level, please feel free to do so. I'm standing by to support.
Just give out the information now. Go for it.
You can contact me at jesseyandell.com, which everybody in this country should own their own name, URL. And also hit me up on LinkedIn as well. I'm the only Jesse Yandell on there. And I'd love to chat with you and to extend the conversation.
Beautiful stuff. Jesse Yandell, thank you for your time as always, brother.
Thanks, Mark.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.